Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to the shop. Today we are making a kneeling chair. Now this looks very weird, but I can guarantee you once you actually try these out for a while, they are incredibly comfortable and they are fantastic for your posture. Yes, I've been wanting to make one of these for a few years. I used to have one in one of my last offices and I've been wanting one for here. So we're finally getting around to making a kneeling chair. So today let's dive into making this. A kneeling chair. Ooh, okay, this is one I've been wanting to do for so stinking long. I'm going to start off with some oak, and this is pre-dimensioned to 1.5 by 1.5. And I'm going to start with a square, and as this is wood by Wright, I'm going to turn it into an octagon. So I've drawn out on the ends exactly where the octagon needs to be, and then I'm going to come in with a scrub plane and get it close to where I want it to be. And then I was originally planning on just cutting to the line. And I thought, you know what, I made this chamfer plane a while ago, and I can set it up so that it has the same dimension on one side, and I can just plane all the way down with that, and voila, I've got an octagon. So if you haven't seen the video on that, if you look up wood by Wright chamfer plane, that should pop up. It's basically just making fences that can then go onto the side of the plane. I also need to make, this is the supporting structure that keeps it upright. You'll understand a little bit later. It has some hooks in it that actually separate the leg from the seat cushions. So this is just 3/4 oak that I had lying around, and we're going to rip this down to about 2.5 inches wide by about 18 inches long. True it all up, make it pretty, and then we're going to drill some holes through it. Actually, before we drill holes through it, we want to round off one end, just because I can. So we're going to use a chisel and lop off the corner and then slowly bring that down to shape to get us a nice clean surface. You really want to refine that edge, grab a file and just round it over, and you get a really nice clean round corner on there. You can do that in both corners of one end of the stick, and then we need to drill a hole through 2 of these octagons and then through the one we just lopped the corners off of. Now originally I was planning to have a bunch of plans for this, but there's a few changes that I need to make on it, so I won't have plans available yet. But I'm probably going to make a new and improved one in the future that I get some plans. It's kind of a hard thing to design, and there aren't really any good plans out there. So this is something I'm kind of prototyping in this case, but yeah. So a lot of my measurements and ideas, we'll hold those off for the future. This will just kind of give you an idea of how it all comes together. Now, 2 of these octagons need to then meet with a third one, and that third one will be the leg. And so I'm actually going to cut a notch in each of the ends of 2 of them to create this octagon intersection joint. It's not really a joint as in anything structural because we're putting a pin through it, but it basically does the same thing. So I'm going to cut down at an angle on either side and then chisel in down in the middle so I can have this half an octagon shape cut out of the inside here. And I wasn't quite sure how this would come out. It took a little bit of fiddling to make the geometry all work, but basically I needed to mark down the bottom and then draw a line from the bottom to the top edge and then cut along that line. And it ended up being very simple in comparison to what I was expecting, but it came out. On either end of the leg piece, I'm going to chamfer all the edges down, and I really like the look of a chamfered octagon. It's sharp and clean, and yeah, I like using that one. Next thing I need to do is drill in holes for the casters, because I'm going to be putting a couple casters in this. They're just slip-in casters, and they have a little recessed ring. So I drill the hole in the bottom for the caster to go in, and then we're going to chisel out a flat spot for that ring to sit on. So come in with a gouge on either end and shape the circle, and then pair out in between them. Next up, we need to drill holes through the foot and into the legs, and this will allow us to put the dowels in and connect them, because this is a dowel joint. That little lapping joint doesn't have any structural connectivity, so we're going to be drilling through the foot, and then once we have both of the holes through the foot, we can line up the legs that will be attached to that and clamp them all in place so that they don't move. I'm even going to be using a beam clamp to go from one end to the other, and this will allow me to mark precisely into the legs where they meet up with the holes in the foot. So I can drive the bit through, and that center snail will just make a little mark in there. Then we can take it all apart, again keeping it level, drill a hole into the end of both of these legs, and make it deep enough for the dowel to go in. I think I had it go in about 2 inches into either of the legs. So then we can cut off the dowels. I want to make them a little bit longer than they need to be because I can always cut them off flush. So these are just out of some scrap stock I had on hand. Nothing particularly special. Now for this, I'm actually starting to use more weld wood. After the glue tests I did recently, I'm seeing that this is a glue I need to get more familiar with. It does take a little bit more work to make up and make it the right batch, but it has a great gap filling, so if your joint isn't perfect on there, it cures relatively quickly. It has the strength of an epoxy with the workability of a wood glue. Its exterior conditions are fantastic. So in this case, I had a good bit of gap in between these. It was a new thing I was experimenting with. And so there is a little bit of gap to fill out on this. And so the weld wood will work perfectly for this process. Trim off the dowels sticking out, flush them out, and voila, we now have the legs. Now you can see how much gap I had on a couple of these. Not perfect, but I'm learning, and this is kind of a prototype for what I want to do in the future. Next, we need to drill a hole through both of these, and this will end up being a catch rod that the top seat will sit on. This can be a bit confusing without plans, and I may end up making those in the future once I actually figure out what I want to do with this and make it exactly what I want. But we're going to be basically creating the fulcrum that the seat and the kneeling apparatus can then rotate on, and there'll be another one drilling through that is a rod that the separator between those two can sit on. But before we go any farther, we need to actually do some of the upholstery work and create both the seat and the kneeling seat. These are both going to be rectangles about 14 inches wide, about 12 inches across. And one of them needs to have a notch out so that it can straddle the legs as they go down into the seat. Again, you'll see what I'm talking about here in a moment. But I wanted them to kind of follow the design of the octagonal shapes from the struts of the leg. So we're actually going to make these seats octagonal as opposed to being just rectangles. So they're going to be elongated octagons. Excuse me. So we want to cut this notch out. I cut down on either side, then take it over to the scroll saw, and this allows me to cut along that line at the bottom, creating the notch that will then straddle the two legs. And then we can lop off all the corners and give it that octagonal feel to match all of the leg structures. Then clean off all the edges. We don't want any burrs sticking onto the fabric or padding. Speaking of padding, I'm going to be using I think it's a 2.5 inch seating foam, a really thick and fairly heavy stuff. Slicing down in to get it close to the same shape as the wooden structure with the plywood. And then we're going to be wrapping it with the batting. And this is what holds it in place and keeps everything together. You have the softer batting on the outside and then the harder foam that actually supports the weight. Wrap that all around and staple it in. We need to do a little bit of sewing as we need to cut that notch out that straddles the legs. And so take it out of the sewing machine. I guess I could have done this by hand, but hey, I've got a sewing machine. Why not use it? And from that point, we can take it up and staple it into place. So you start on one side, and then you go across the opposite side, and you stretch it, and you pull it in place and staple it. And then you go to another side, and then you go to the opposite side from that. And you kind of go back and forth until you evenly stretch it all the way around and staple it up in. And there are two pads, one that you kneel on and one that you sit on. Now we can attach it to the structure. Now for this, we're actually going to be drilling down through them. And I didn't have the screws on hand that I really wanted that would be 1.5 inches thick plus going into the 3/4 inch plywood. I had 2 inch, so I wanted to make them a little bit longer. So we pre-drilled through the legs, and then I brought in a regular auger bit and counterbored them in so that the heads would sink down in further. And rather than going and getting the correct screw, we just changed the hole to match the screws we had on hand. And again, this is more or less a prototype for me, so I'm kind of experimenting and playing with what I have in the shop. It's a good reminder that you don't have to make things perfect. Just make them to what you have. Be willing to be flexible and fit with what you have rather than what you want to have. And it's a good way to save money as well as save a little bit of time. And then we can drill the holes for the two casters on the other end. Now this is the separator leg that we made earlier. Now I need to make notches in this that will then fit into one of the bolts that we had go through the leg. And this will be what actually sets the height of the seat that you sit on. And I chose an auger bit that is slightly larger than the bolt it is going to be locking into. I put the bolts at an angle across the board just because I could, and I thought it looked kind of cool. Then we can draw a line that is parallel to that line of holes and cut it off at that. And this will make it so there's an even spacing between each of these notches. So, woohoo, there we go. Next we need to plane that smooth, and then we can bring in a saw and cut down to each of these holes so that we get a nice clean edge on there. And of course, make it look pretty and round over the end. Why not? So we can line up the holes that need to come off. I just cut them out at 45 degrees. It's just a retaining notch so that everything fits down in. So you can see how I slice off from one side and slice off from the other side. And now I have a notch that will then hold onto the bolt. Come in with a file, plane it up, make them nice and pretty and smooth and happy. Oh, I like this. This is one of these boards that I wasn't quite sure how I would do, but I was really happy with how it came out. And some of those, I needed to come back in and file them out a little bit more, and some of them worked out really well. Now for the sitting side, I need to actually bolt it to this, but at a very, very acute angle on the bolts, on the risers. So I cut one of them off, and then I used that to transfer lines to the other one. And this would allow me to cut it just about the same. Got really, really close. But we needed to actually trim it up and make them perfect. So after cutting them both at an angle, we could clamp this all together, and then I could use that and bring in the plane to flatten them both out to be in the same plane and coplanar. Now we have that in place, now we can start working on attaching it to the seat. But this small bit of attachment wasn't quite enough. I wanted to make another rod that will then fit underneath the seat to hold it in place. So I grabbed a scrap piece of 3/4 inch plywood and then ripped it down and ripped it down again until it ended up being a stick about 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch wide. And this will then recess into the ends of those two legs to help then support the rest of the seat. As you can see, this is really kind of all an experiment for me, and I'm playing it by ear as we go through. There aren't any plans for it. It's just, let's see, this should work. We'll fit that in there. And then I can learn from this, and the next time I can make it a little bit better. So I'm probably going to be making another one in the not-too-distant future. Once I played with this for a while, I can find out what I want, and we'll make one a little bit better. Put some tape on the saw, and it becomes a perfect depth stop, so you can stop at that point, because I knew the board was that wide. So if I cut down to that depth, when I put the stick in, it will be flush with the top. So then we can come in and chisel out the waste, take it down to those lines and clean it up, even when you blow out a little corner like that. Oh well. So then we can slide the stick down in and clean them up until that fits all the way down in there, and you can see how that thing creates a larger platform for the seat to fit on. So this is where that adjustment rod can go through. Bolt goes through the leg and then down into the bottom one so you can adjust how high it will be. And then we can attach the seat on. And for this one, I had the right length screws, so we're just going to be using a regular countersink bit. Yes, you can just put one of these in your bracing bit and go to town. Putting 2 screws through the ends of the legs and then 2 screws through this horizontal beam that we created. So we can have 4 screws through the legs and 2 screws through the beam. So we have 6 screws total attaching the seat down. 2 long ones, 2 short ones, and then 2 other short ones if I remember correctly. So once we've drilled all these holes, hey, now we can actually play with it. Now the holes that the screws go through are larger than they need to be so that they can pull the board down to the seat. We don't want the threads engaging with the leg. We want them to engage with the seat. And so you can see how this will pull it down nice and flush. Good tight fit on there. Now, before we add finish, we can make sure everything is the way we want it, and make sure all of the bolts are going through the right direction. I put it together twice in the wrong orientation, and then in the third time it actually worked out. So let's set this down on the floor and see what we get. Ooh, okay, that's comfortable. And that is how it's supposed to look. I know, it's really weird to look at, but it feels great. So we're going to take it apart, add some finish to it. I want to put a protective finish on this, but I want the color of boiled linseed oil. So we're going to apply boiled linseed oil, let that soak in and cure and dry up. And then we can strap on the gloves and put in the poly. And I'm going to use some wipe-on poly. And just as a note, the boiled linseed oil I use is homemade. It has no chemicals in it, so it's safe to put on with hands. But the wipe-on poly, yeah, you want gloves for that. So we're just going to wipe this on. I put on 5 coats, sanding in between coat 3 and coat 5. Sanding before coat 3 and coat 5. And it gives it a really nice polished finish, and it's one of my favorite little finishes. Now we can go back, put it all together, and take the sucker for a test spin. Yay! It's finally getting close. This is one that, I've been wanting to make for a long, long time. Ooh, look! It's the hand tool rescue wrench, the mini version. Yeah, I just got back from his shop, so I have another chance to throw it in place. Now, take it for a test spin. You can see how you can adjust the height and adjust it to your sitting position and angle. Set it down on the ground and hop in. Ooh, yay! And even with the clogs and the casters on the bottom, this whole thing will spin and rotate, so I can move anywhere in the shop relatively easily.
Now
and
that is
I am really, really happy. Even at the desk, I've spent hours and hours in this doing editing already, and I've got a few modifications I want to make, but most of the day, it's exactly what I want.
So there you have it, a kneeling chair. I have to say, if you've never tried a kneeling chair, they are so comfortable and so much fun. Now, the first couple times you sit into them, they're a little awkward and they feel weird because they're forcing you to make your spine more in line. They are incredibly comfortable and a lot of fun to sit in. So I hope you like this video. If you'd like to see me do something like this in the future, or if you have any particular questions about this, let me know down below. Thank you for watching today. If you do have any thoughts or ideas, concerns, let me know those down below as well. And I think that'll about do it for today. And until next time, have a wonderful day. Kneeling chair. Not just for Catholics anymore.